good evening. My name is Catherine Wheatley.
Okay.
I'm a lecturer in film studies at King's College London with a specialism in film and religion, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here tonight to chair this special panel discussion following a preview screening of Stations of the Cross. I hope that those of you who are here tonight enjoyed the film, if enjoyed is indeed the right word. I've seen it several times now, and I think we would probably all agree that it's a very powerful film, a very unique film, and a quite complex experience indeed watching it. It has accrued great acclaim to date and has won prizes at the Berlin International Film Festival as well as showing at Edinburgh. It's certainly a very provocative work, and I've no doubt there'll be quite a lot to discuss over the next 20 minutes or so as we try and unpick some of the rich themes that run through it. Tackling that task with me today is, first of all, Sister Myra Poole, a former head teacher of Notre Dame School in Southwark. Sister Myra has been a Notre Dame sister for more than 40 years.
More than 50 years.
More than 50 years, and has been extraordinarily active in promoting women's rights within the Church. In addition to being founder of the Catholic Women's Ordination, Sister Poole has been instrumental in founding numerous other women's groups, including, but not limited to, the Catholic Women's Network and the British and Irish School of Feminist Theology. And she was very nearly thrown out of the church in 2001, so we might think about how that's affected her reading of the film today. Also joining me is Tony Sobrado, a freelance writer who focuses on philosophy, science, atheism and current affairs, and a contributor to the Huffington Post. Tony also produces the Biggest Questions podcast, discussing some of the trifling issues of reality, existence, truth and consciousness with some of the world's leading thinkers. His essay, Why I'm Not a Christian Theist, is featured in the forthcoming book, The Faith I Left Behind, which is published by the Centre for Inquiry in New York. Tony holds a BSc in Political Science and Philosophy from the London School of Economics and a Master's in Social Theory. And you can find him on Twitter at Tony Sobrado, and I'm sure we'll be continuing some of the conversations here today via social media. So welcome, Sister Poole and Tony. What I'd like to do is begin by asking you both to speak in turn very briefly about your initial responses to the film. So, Sister Poole, what did you make of Maria's journey through the film?
She really thought that she was right. That priest who was dreadful, Father Weber, and the old, because it's the St Pius X Society really, and they call it St Paul's in this, and it's been boosted by the two former popes. That's one of the other tragedies of it all. But you know, even he tried to tell her that she got to live and not quit too early, and there was an arrogance in the whole thing. In the end, she was just plain arrogant. She wouldn't listen to the one truth. There wasn't much truth, but the one truth that even that priest was trying to give to her. Of course, the mother was unbelievable, but then she was brought up in that very narrow form of religion that certainly existed for some before Vatican II. I can't even see who's here, but we all know about Vatican II in the 1960s. And the big Pope John, he opened up the church, and so it's very sad. But people do exist like that in the Roman Catholic Church even today. They're dysfunctional, so a part of the Catholic Church is dysfunctional, there's no doubt about it. So I'm very sad, but it gives a lot of food for thought in so many levels. I mean, because I'm getting old and I've lived a long time, when I first joined up as a religious, which was a very strong vocation for me, so you know you can talk about various other things, is that it had samples of the kind of nonsense we saw in that film. Young religious in the 50s were asked to do things actually daft, and I thought they were daft too. So it's not an unknown factor. The other thing I'm very interested in, the Anna and Dietrich, the brother and sister, who actually wrote the script, I understand, or got the story, they lived in South Germany and they had undergone some of that kind of treatment. So it comes from a reality. And there are people still knocking around like that who still keep these. I could mention two societies. Opus Dei is one, which has been dreadful. Lots of money, but very narrow. It often goes with it, lots of money and narrowness. and the Pius X Society. So unfortunately, it's still there.
And Tony?
Well, essentially, to be fair, the priest at the end is also the priest at the beginning who tells her she must sacrifice her life in order to fulfill God. And the film, for me, essentially touches upon the problems with fundamentality in general. Any fundamentality in general is problematic because it holds the position that truth, reality and knowledge is fixed, and once you're there, then you become harder to change and open up to new ideas. And the film does a great role at exposing that and also pitting this fundamental dogmatic view of not just God and religion but reality, and then counterposing that against the journey of a young adolescent girl who finds herself in very problematic situations because it's conflicting with her individual personhood and society, and in the end it results in her, for her own scheme of logically following that train of thought of sacrificing herself to die. So the film deals with the issues of religious fundamentality, how that affects the person, and essentially what we should do when we logically think about big pictures of reality idea and Christianity in general.
Okay, thank you both very much. I'm interested that Dietrich Brueggemann himself, who's the director of the film, as Sister Poole pointed out, he has gone on record and been very clear in stating that he's not interested in making a film about abuse scandals, and that this film is doing something rather different, although, as you rightly say, he has grown up as part of the Society of St. Pius X. And I think the film does seem to imply that Maria is the victim of some rather horrific treatment. We might call that spiritual abuse, we might call it something else. And so my question to both of you would be, to what extent should we see this film as being about the church's abuse of a young, impressionable woman, and to what extent is this something to do with the relationship with her mother, who is an incredible, powerful figure within the film? Maybe, Tony, you could respond first.
Yeah, sure. To a certain extent, I think they're both interlocked. So on the one hand, the film deals with the relationship between a teenage girl and her mother. Those relationships are always going to be problematic, especially at the adolescence age. The mother holds a lot of power over her daughter, and you can see why. That perhaps isn't specifically unique in the case of religious fundamentalism. Many mothers have many issues with their teenage daughters. What compounds the issue and makes it worse is that on top of that she's stepping on the foundation of religious fundamentalism, and you see that all the way through the film in terms of how she directs her daughter what to do socially, in terms of behaviour. She can't go to any kind of choir, any kind of music, so it kind of further compounds the issue. That it's a mixture of two. You could take it any other way, but for me it puts it together nicely and compounds the worst. I think the issue that she is demanding an authoritative mother stems from her religious fundamentalism on top of that. So.
Okay, so it's a perfect storm of terrible
yeah,
parenting
it's
and terrible religion.
A great mix of two bad worlds, so yeah.
And Sister Poole, would you agree with that?
I would, but I hate the word fundamental and I don't like the word radical, because I think we use both too freely. Real fundamental is going to the truth, and unfortunately this isn't the truth. And radical, you know, what is it to be? Radical is to go to the root of things. And I think that's what particularly feminist theologians now, that's what they're trying to do, to go to the root of the real Christian message, which is compassion and love. And it's not anxiety, it's not killing yourself, it's not stopping people. It's basically what we've seen is heresy. And everyone knows any history about heresies, so-called heresies, is Gnosticism, whereby anything to do with the body and emotions, etc., is evil. And that's had a tremendous effect. We've never actually known full Christianity, and that's one of the biggest problems. Real Christianity, which Vatican II is, and all the other churches, you know. But it's very difficult, those two words. In one level, I call myself a fundamentalist because I want to go to the root of things, and that's what we're trying to do now. I think what is normal is that most people need some kind of spirituality. Those who leave Christian spirituality, no matter what it is, you know, of different religions as well, terribly important. But somehow there's something in us as human beings that needs more than what we see. And that is a difficult thing. And one thing that's always puzzled me, why is it so difficult to change attitudes in this Roman Catholic Church? I work for women's full equality in every sphere, but the most difficult is tackling these churches. You could get the Anglican Church knows how to fight like mad to get women bishops, whether you want them or not. So there's something fundamentally, there's a fault line that runs through all the theology we've had of God, and I'm sorry to say, but it's what you call a patriarchal, here I'm using big words, but it comes from the mindset of philosophy in Greece, and it got into the system, and it's got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now people can't see the wood for the trees. So this film for me raises these enormous problems. I can't idealise this film, clearly. I could bash it to death. And I can't idealise those people, because I've heard some terrible things said by people like this. So it's a very, very big problem. And I can only be myself and be quite honest, because I've experienced a lot of nasty sayings. And believe me, they're not, because I've been, for 20 years, we've been on the Piazza Westminster, the Catholic Piazza, listening to the people who come out of so-called mass, the things they've said to us. I'd rather ordain a cat than ordain a woman. You know, it's gone totally wrong. And this is the big thing that most good theologians, feminists and the good men, there are a few good men, but on the whole, the women are better theologians now. So I come very much from a theological aspect, and we've all got such a twisted view, and some people have been so hurt in this situation, you know, psychologically damaged, and people don't get over it. Abuse should take a long time to get over, no matter what it is.
And it's interesting to me that it's anorexia that we see her suffering,
That's
that we see
right.
Maria suffering from, which is statistically a particularly female form of self-punishment and self-abnegation.
And self-harming. Women prisoners do it the same thing. They self-harm. They always blame themselves. And that's, of course, the low image of women, which the church are deeply responsible for.
And a question to both of you. In a sense, by picking what's called in the film the Society of St. Paul, but is effectively a fictionalised version of the Society of St. Pius X, which is, you know, a famously extreme, maybe not fundamentalist, breakaway faction of the Catholic Church, whose members oppose religious freedom, homosexuality, equal rights for women, the separation of the church and state, and it even has historical links with the Nazi Party. Do you think that, in a sense, the film is picking a rather easy target?
Essentially, yes. I mean, you can see why they've done it, because it picks on that fundamentalist crowd. Now, I know the sister doesn't like the term fundamentalist.
No, it's okay, but you know what I mean. I'm trying to be pedantic.
You can see why it's an easy route for them to go down, this kind of stereotypical view of the Catholic Church being authoritative, patriarchal, intolerant of other religions, of homosexuality, abortion, this kind of stuff.
Terrible.
What I think, though, in terms of, just to address some of the sister's points of fundamentality, is that everyone thinks they've got a fundamental notion of truth going on, whether you're an atheist, a theist, a religious, or a scientist. Worldviews clash all the time. I think what the film does that's very interesting in terms of actually bringing this aspect of reality to the fore is that, from the sister's notion here, true Catholicism is about being compassionate. I'm sure the girl's mother, Maria, in the film believes she's being compassionate, and in her schema, it's logically correct that she tells her daughter to behave like this, because at the end of the day, she's promised the afterlife. So again, these ideas of what we do with truth, reality, and fundamental truth, I believe I've got some notion of truth about reality. The sister's got one, and Maria's mum's got one. So these are the problems that come to the fore, and whether someone's notion of compassion is different from anything else, it's obviously a clash of worldviews. Mm-hmm. Here, I think the director and the scriptwriter have started off at a good position, which is to take the dogmatic views that everyone knows are negative about the Catholic faith, and then throw it straight into contemporary society and kind of see how all hell breaks loose, basically. So I think it's probably an easy target, but I think the overall message of the film necessitated that role. So yeah, I think it's a good choice.
I think it's got it's got so much in it, it's hard to pick out. I'm sorry we haven't got a psychologist here tonight, because they would do the whole psychological effect, particularly on young girls. They're very, you can impress them so quickly, teenagers, you know. It's just extraordinary. People are truly what you used to call philosophically tabula rasas. You can do an awful lot with people. And the baptism was dreadful in this. Talk about the old baptism, you know, because they haven't got, none of us got sin on our souls. What language are we talking about? We're all blessed, good people. And we all make mistakes, some make worse than others, some people are psychologically imbalanced. So it throws, I agree with you, Tony, it throws up so much in so many areas.
But at least one of we agree with some common ground, so at least I think you can understand how a lot of people feel like that in the Christian tradition because of what's been perpetuated throughout history in the church. I know you're kind of more pragmatic, modern view of Christianity, but it's not hard to understand why people feel that abortion is wrong, homosexuality is wrong, because for a long time the Christian church in particular has practiced that. So not everyone is going to be so pragmatic about it, and that's the problem with it. I'm sure many in the Catholic Church.
It's changing, because the whole thing about this, you know, most research on justice has been done through a male psyche, but it's changing now, because women and men often make decisions in a different way. Women make decisions in relationships. So you make a decision according to your local circumstances. So when it comes to abortion, for example, women will talk about, in some cases it could be right. In others, it can be manslaughter. In America, it's manslaughter. If at 8 months you kill a child in your womb, it is in fact called manslaughter. So you've got, but I think that's a big difference between the psyche, the male psyche. The male psyche is changing, but the female psyche tends to tend to make our decisions in relationships. They're not black and white decisions. And what the Roman Catholic Church tries to do is say all abortion's wrong, all this women's stuff is wrong, you know, and chastity is the only way. Marriage is, you know, unless you have children in marriage, when, you know, sexually, if you do anything else, it's wrong. And actually, that's totally wrong. So I do think the difference between gender response is quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's more and more being written about that.
And I think you're absolutely right as well in saying that young girls in particular are these kind of tabula rasa that desperately seek around for something to kind of pin their anxieties to. And there are films that are coming out from America in particular at the moment that show young girls are interested in social media or in shopping or in sex. We could go on. But what's interesting to me is that at this particular moment in time, Dietrich Brüggemann has chosen to make a film about the young girl being very much attracted to extreme Catholicism. Now he says he feels that there is a resurgence of religion across America and also across large swathes of Europe. He talks about
and right-wing religion.
Yeah, right-wing Christianity and militant Islam, for example. And that he feels that this is a result of young people feeling a kind of spiritual void at the moment. And we have that lovely phrase in the film where Maria says, you know, you live in a world of Facebook and television and you've sold your soul to be dead in the middle of life, I think is what she says. So do you think that Brüggemann is right? Are we at a point when young people in particular are turning back to faith?
Generally, no. I know there's been an upspring of religious fundamentalism, particularly right-wing in the States. I think generally, no. I think atheists are generally on the increase. I don't think young people are reverting to old-style Catholicism as much anymore. I think the interesting bit, ironically, about the Facebook and the social media, whether you like dance club music, whatever, is that
the gospel.
Yeah,
no.
It's like you've sold your soul spiritually, but if you're not into stuff that you like, then what are you doing? So either way, you lose in terms of enjoying yourself and selling your soul. It's just from that perspective, they want to prevent you having any kind of enjoyment and make you feel guilty about it. On the flip side, if you don't do that, then you're not going to go to heaven. So that's the problem with it. I think resurgence of any form of religion in the West isn't going to hold up for much long. I mean, in Christianity in America is different. I can go on to that later if you want. And apart from Europe and in the Middle East, even though it's quite popular for certain atheists, especially in the face of radical Islam, to bash the Muslim religion to a certain extent, I think clearly what happens in the Middle East is far more complex than pure religion. It's got to do with socio-economic and political factors. It's clearly why you see Muslim uprisings in certain parts of Muslim countries and not other Muslim countries in the world. So to answer your question, I don't think generally young people reverting back to that. I think ignorance is generally coming down and there's too much access to information and education for that to happen, thankfully.
Sister Myra?
I'm not sure I agree with you, Tony. I mean, I can only speak from my experiences going
By all
on.
means.
In the Anglican Church, it's very different. But I was an Anglican at one time. So, you see, anyone who's the younger, and it's particularly the men, when they come into this church and want to be priests, they're all right. Most of them are right wing now. It's terrible, and of course they're going to go through all the problems, and eventually they give up because they'd be so narrow. Their human nature won't be able to cope with it. But I honestly not sure. There is an upsurge. I'm not going to compare America to here because we're much more secular Britain than America. You have to have a religion in America to order to get on. You know, it's a bit messy, America, in many ways because the continent. But in England, certainly we're a secular society, and there's nothing wrong with the secular society. But there is this need in people, which I can't answer, for something more than the life that they are experiencing. And that I find there is something in the humanity that wants more than what is known as total reality. I don't know if I'm playing myself very well, or everything's rational, because life isn't just rational, and that's the problem. And so there are so many dimensions there. I have no answer for that, but it does seem to me there is something deep in people, even if they're atheists or agnostics. I mean, basically, only God knows if God exists, so it's very hard to be an atheist because you can't prove whether there is a power beyond us or a power holding us up. I don't know. But it is a puzzle, and I'm not sure, Tony, that you're right, from the people I've mixed with, particularly on the continent where Catholicism is still, okay, could be the wrong kind, still very deep because they pay taxes in Germany, they pay taxes in Austria, they tithe it. In Britain, yes, because Catholicism has never been very strong in Britain. I mean, I totally agree there. Or any religion, really. But it is, I mean, so much is, I just don't understand. I don't understand so much with it, but there is a need in human beings for something more than who we are, and it is interesting. But the great thing is now we can actually choose for ourselves. The church can't keep it back now. I mean, more people are on the side of a total change in the church, whether it's ordination, anything, and also a whole thing about authority, democracy. That's all going up in great transition. That's all going up in flames. It's going to take a long time, but it is going, and it will collapse, and something new, a totally different form, will survive. So I don't know the people in the audience if you think I'm talking nonsense, but there is something in us that needs something.
Great, thank you. Tony, I just have one very last question, and it sort of speaks to what Sister Poole's just been saying. The film itself seems to be really very critical of this extreme Catholicism, and yet at the final scene we have that miracle, which strikes me as being somewhat ambivalent, actually, as to whether or not it does believe or not. And I was just wondering what your response to that was.
From my perspective, it just shows how silly this becomes in terms of kind of seeing God everywhere and what you do with coincidence. So I know you felt it was kind of pushing it a bit more to perhaps the miracle is working because of the sacrifice. From my perspective, it just showed, well, if that doesn't surprise me that the mother believes that, because if she believes that, she should believe anything in terms of coincidences. So
Absolutely.
So, either very damning or potentially raising the possibility of grace. The conversation will have to continue, and I'm sure it will do outside of this particular discussion. Both Tony and I are on Twitter, and the film has the Twitter handle @ArrowFilms for those of you who would be interested in participating in further discussion or telling friends and family about the film's release, which is on the 28th of November nationally. So it just sort of finally...
By the way, Kath, we're on Twitter and Facebook. We have a lot of followers.
And do you know your Twitter handle?
Oh, I can't remember it offhand, but if I can't
well, I'm sure
on Twitter. But we have about 2,000 followers.
Wonderful.
So there's a whole lot. Anyway, I don't want to say anymore because these things are all in development. But we're very much on Twitter. Our younger members do all that.
Well, I'm sure if people look for Arrow Films, Tony and I will be there. We'll make sure that we find you.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
And then we can continue ploughing the depths of this film. And if you could all join me in thanking our two wonderful speakers tonight, Tony Sobrado and Sister Myra Poole.
Thank you.
Thank you.